Welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you had your own go at the Pandas section exercise questions. And what we're going to do here is simply go through the solutions and explain any points of confusion. Let's get started by heading over to the Jupyter Notebook. All right, here I am at the exercise notebook. Let's go ahead and get started. First tasks we had to do was just run these 3 cells to make sure we read in the data correctly. And we went ahead and read it in as a data frame called hotels. So the first question is, how many rows are there? There's lots of different ways to get this sort of answer. You could just say hotels.info, and eventually it'll report back at the bottom how many rows there are. Actually, excuse me, at the top how many rows there are. It's going to say there's 119,390 entries going from 0 to this number, and then some of them have null values. That's why these numbers are slightly different, but that's actually the next question. So that's one way to do it. The other way is to actually just call length of hotels, or the length of your data frame, and it'll also report back the same result. So hotels.info, length of hotels should be the same thing. Now the question, is there any missing data? If so, which column has the most missing data? You can go back to our lectures on missing data with pandas, and you can remember you could just say hotels is null, which returns back a data frame of Boolean values, and then you can take the sum of this, and it treats trues as ones and falses as zeros to get really quickly a count of the nulls per column. And then here you can clearly see that company is the one with the most nulls. So that's why we see yes, company missing the most values here is the company column. Okay, so how do we drop the company column from the data set? We simply say hotels is equal to hotels.drop the company along axes is equal to 1. And we have to do this reassignment if we do want this to be a permanent change. No output here since it's kind of obvious what the output should look like. It will just be the same data frame without the company column. Okay, the next question is, what are the top 5 most common country codes in the data set? There's lots of different ways you could do this. One way that often beginning students think of is to try to do a group by and then call the count method on that and then sort that. But probably the faster way of doing this is just calling value counts, because recall value counts is going to just count the number of instances per distinct value in a categorical column. So if we take a look at the country column, whoops, hotels with an S, there we go. So if we take a look at the country column, we can see that there are these country codes. So you would have to come back to the table here and then look up which is the actual country code. So we can see here we have this country categorical column, and so once you figure that out, you would know coming back here that country is the column you're interested in. So once we know this, we can simply call .value counts, and it will give us the number of value counts per country code. And then if we wanted to just grab, let's say, the top 10, I can just index this by saying colon all the way to number 10. And here's the top 10. In our case, we just wanted the top 5. So start from the beginning, colon, index or slice all the way to the 5th position. So that's one way to do this. The harder way is to try to use a group by. So to do that, what you need to do is say group by country, and then you have to actually call count on this. Now what's a little confusing sometimes for students is when they run this count, they see that you're getting the same result for every single column value. And that makes sense because all this is answering is the number of instances per row per category here. And it kind of makes sense that every single column would have the same count because it's just actually per country. So this is essentially answering the question, how many times does a row for the hotel column show up for country ABW? And it's going to be 2 times because country ABW itself shows up 2 times. So it should be the same number of rows for every single column. And that makes sense because what is happening here, it's also including null values as a row being present there. So it's going to be the same across every single column. So then what you have to do is then sort this again, and you have to sort it by essentially any one of these columns. So you can say sort values, for example, by the hotel, and then if we want here, we can say ascending is equal to false, run that, and eventually you'll start seeing that you get the same results, and then you probably maybe just want to grab one column here for readability, hotel, and then you start seeing that you're getting the same results here. However, this is a lot more code than what's necessary for the value counts. So I would recommend in general, if someone's asking you the top number of instances of a category, that you start thinking of value counts. It is possible to do it with a group by, but obviously a lot more complicated here. Okay, so we were able to figure out the top 5 most common country codes in the data set. Now let's go ahead and move on to what is the name of the person who paid the highest ADR, that is the average daily rate, and then how much was their ADR? Lots of different ways we can do this. One way is to just do a sort. So what we could do here is say, grab the hotels, the entire data frame, and say sort values by ADR, and then do it in descending order. So when you run this, you'll notice now everything is sorted in descending order based off the average daily rate. However, I was really just interested in the ADR and maybe the name of the person. So in that case, I'm just going to subselect the list of columns ADR and the name of that person. And so here we have this person, Daniel Walter, and their ADR is $5,400. So that's quite an expensive average daily rate. And if we really just wanted the very first item here, I could just say .ILOC at 0. And there you have it. So that's one way of doing this. Another way of playing around with this is, recall you have the 𝑖𝒿𝒂𝒏𝒂𝒔 functionality as well. So you could say ADR 𝑖𝒿𝒂𝒏𝒂𝒔, and that will return back the actual index location of this person that paid $5,400. So keep in mind, this is another approach you could have taken, and then with this, you could have just said hotels.ILOC at that particular index. Or if you wanted to, you could have just copied and pasted this to do it all in one line. And then you start seeing all the information for Daniel Walter, as well as how much he paid, which was his average daily rate of $5,400 a night. So keep that in mind. You could use 𝑖𝒿𝒂𝒏𝒂𝒔 or use sort values. Kind of depends on what you're trying to achieve. Okay, so now that we've figured out the max ADR that somebody paid, the next task question is, the ADR is the average daily rate for a person's stay at the hotel. What is the mean average daily rate across all the hotel stays in the data set? And so essentially what it's trying to ask you is, what is the average value for the ADR column? And that's really simple. We're just going to say hotels ADR, and then what's the average value there? And so the average value is $101.83. If you want, you can also round this. You can use just Python's built-in round function to round it to 2 decimal places. Okay, so again, it's just asking for what's the average ADR across all the hotel stays. So now let's start getting a little more complicated. All right, the next question is, what is the average, mean, number of nights for a stay across the entire data set? So on average, how long do people stay at a hotel? And then again, feel free to round this to 2 decimal points. This one is a lot trickier, and often students get confused on this because we have to actually create a new column. If you come back up here to this table and you start trying to figure out, okay, where is the number of nights stayed? If you come down, eventually you'll see that it's actually separated between weekend nights and weeknights. So that means somebody could have stayed Monday through Sunday, and then they would have 5 stays in weeknights and 2 stays in weekend nights. So what we have to actually do is we have to add these together to get the total number of nights stayed. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back down and create that new column for us. So that's probably the trickiest part, is that you had to figure that out, that column is not directly available to you. So don't feel bad if you weren't able to figure that out and accidentally just did stays in weeknights or stays in weekend nights. But what I'm going to do is say total stay nights is equal to, and in this case we have the stays in weeknights plus the stays in weekend nights. So when you run that, now you can take the average of that column by saying hotels, total stay nights, and then take the average, and you'll see on average people are at 3.43. And again, you could just round this to 2 decimal points. So the tricky part here is you had to go back to that table and figure out, oh, weeknights are actually separated from weekend nights. So if I want the total number of nights being stayed, you had to add them together. So not so much of a test in Pandas, but more of a test in your general critical thinking of going to that table and realizing that that split occurred. Okay, next we're going to do is answer the question, what is the average total cost for a stay in the data set? And keep in mind, this is asking you not the average daily cost, but the total stay cost. So the way we do this is we have to figure out the average daily rate times the total number of days stayed. Because again, we come back up here and you'll notice there's not really a column that describes how much the customer paid in total. We have the number of weekend nights they stayed, the number of weeknights they stayed, and if we start scrolling here, there's not actually a numerical column saying how much they paid in total. Instead, we have, if we scroll up, the average daily rate. So we have the average daily rate. So what we need to do is, if we read here, it's calculated by dividing the sum of all the lodging transactions by the total number of staying nights. So because they're saying it's the sum of all lodging transactions, we're going to assume that it also includes things like the deposit, because the deposit is a lodging transaction. So what we had to figure out is essentially multiply the average daily rates by the number of days or nights that they actually stayed. So again, kind of a tricky thing to figure out here, but hopefully you're able to do a little bit of sleuthing here with this data column reference and realize that while you don't have the total, you do have the average daily rate, and then we just figured out how many days the person stayed by combining stay in weeknights and weekend nights. Okay, so we're going to come back down here and let's figure this out. So what's the average total cost for a stay in the data set? Well, what we do here is we first have to figure out that total cost. So what is the total cost someone pays if you have their average daily rate as well as the number of days they stayed? Well, it's just going to be ADR, whoops, make sure we have brackets there, ADR times hotels, and we already calculated this to be total stay nights. So we're going to say this is total spend, because we know ADR, according to the description, is essentially calculated off the total stay and their total spend, which means if we wanted to back calculate total spend, we simply multiply the average daily rate times total stay nights, run that, and then it asks us for the average total spend. So we say hotels, total spend, and get the average there. And of course you could round this again. Okay, so let's move on to what are the names and emails of people who made 5 special requests. Going back to conditional filtering here, we're going to have to recall what is the actual column for the special request. So you'd go up to the column reference and realize that it's simply called total of special requests, and we're looking for people that made 5 special requests. So we just pass in that Boolean filter where the total of special requests is equal to 5, and then we want the names and emails, so we can simply grab that off, name, comma, email on the results, and you get back the names and emails. And if you want, you could sort this as well. But here are the names and emails, people that made exactly 5 special requests. So moving on, we're going to come back here and we say, what percentage of hotel stays were classified as repeat guests? And keep in mind that do not base this off the name of the person, because we artificially generated the name of these people, but instead base it off the is repeated guest column. So we're essentially asking you the percentage of Boolean values as true or ones in the is repeated guest column. So what we'd have to do here is just quickly confirm what that is repeated guest column looks like. So we have is repeated guest. It looks like it's zeros and ones. Let's confirm that by asking for the unique values. And it is zeros and ones, which are essentially acting as Booleans. 0 if they're not a repeated guest, 1 if they are a repeated guest. So I want to figure out, well, how many people are repeated guests divided by the total number of guests, which is essentially the length of the hotel. So what we'll do here is we'll say hotels is repeated guests is equal to 1. And then actually we're going to grab the sum of this. So we're going to say, give me the sum of hotels is repeated guests equal to 1. Because it's going to sum up all these ones together. It's essentially a count of how many ones we have in this column. So again, just to make it clear, we have 3,810 instances of is repeated guess being equal to 1 because the other option was 0. And we can only really do this operation because it's just dealing with zeros and ones. So now we wanted to figure out what percentage is this of total guess. Well, we simply need to divide by the length of hotels, run that, and then the last thing we want to do is to get this into percent form. We can multiply this by 100, and now we can see we have around 3.19%. You could always round this as well, but essentially 3.19% of all the rows have is repeated guessed equal to 1. Lots of different ways you could do this, but this is probably the way that breaks it down into clear steps. All right, the next question is, what are the top 5 most common last names in the data set? And there's a bonus, can you figure this out in one line of Pandas code? Now we did have a quick note here that for simplicity, you can treat a title such as MD as a last name. For example, if you actually take a look at hotel's name, there are some people that have MD as a title, such as Caroline Conley, MD. For simplicity, I'm just going to say, go ahead and treat MD as if it's this person's last name. So that's just for simplicity. If you want, you can get more sophisticated and strip out things like Doctor, or MD, or PhD, etc. But for our case, just treat MD as if it was a last name. Okay, so how can we do this? This is pretty much where you're going to want to use either a custom apply function or just use lambda. So essentially what we want to do is if we assume that we're just looking at the very last string and that the last name is going to be separated by a white space, that means if I do something like apply, and I'll go ahead and use a lambda expression here, you could just make this into a function. But what I want to do is if I split this up on white space, then I get back these lists of first names and last names. And I just want the last item in this list. So then I just index with -1 here. And now I have all the unique last names here. These are all the last names, which finally then I can call value counts on to get the most common ones. And the most common ones are Smith, Johnson, Williams, Jones, and Brown. Again, you could do this with a custom function that essentially does the same thing. So in a custom function form, you would just write this lambda expression as a function, such as grab last name, takes in a name, and then it's going to go ahead and return name.split -1. And instead of saying apply this lambda expression, you can say apply, after you've run the cell and defined it, apply grab last name. And you run that, and it's the exact same result. Kind of up to you which method you prefer. Okay, so next task is, what are the names of the people who booked the most number of children and babies for their stay? And don't worry if they're canceled. You should only consider people who were reported at the time of their reservations. So essentially what we have to do here is you have to figure out that you want to understand both babies and children are 2 separate values. So the total number of kids should be babies plus children. So in that case, it's going to be a new column for us that will label, for example, total kids, and have that equal to babies plus children. And then, whoops, it should be hotels. There we go. And so once you have this total kids column, you can just say hotels sort values by total kids. And let's go ahead and sort it in ascending order is equal to false. And then after we run this, we'll get back all the columns, but I'm actually just interested in these couple of columns here. Particularly, I'm just interested in the name columns. So if I really wanted to, I could just say, give me the names of these people ordered. And we can see the top 3 are Jamie Ramirez, Nicholas Parker, and Mark Robinson. And if you wanted to, you could add on a list here to grab more information off of these guys, like just the number of total kids. And you can see here, it's 10, 10, and then 9. And after these top 3, it goes down to 3 kids. Okay, so quite a vacation to have 10 babies with you, but who knows what's actually going on there. Up next, what are the top 3 most common area codes in the phone numbers, excuse me, and the area code is the first 3 digits. So the way we can do this, it's really similar to grabbing the last names. So if you want, we take a look at the phone number column, So you can go up to the table and see that there's a phone number column. You'll notice that they're all essentially 3 digits, a dash, 3 digits, a dash, 4 digits. We actually just care about the area code, the first 3 digits. So you can either do a custom function or just say grab the phone number and return back the first 3 digits as :3. Run that. Now you have all the area codes, and just as we did for the last name counts, you just say value counts here, and the top 3 most common ones are 168, 167, and 166. Keep in mind, sometimes it gets a little confusing. This first set of numbers, those are the actual index values for these particular phone numbers. So just keep that in mind. It sometimes gets a little confusing to see different sets of numbers here. Okay, so let's go back down here. How many arrivals took place between the 1st and 15th of the month, inclusive of the 1st and 15th? Bonus, can you do this in one line of Pandas code? So if we take a look again at what columns are available to us, there is an arrival date, day of month column. So if we take a look at hotels, there's this column called arrival date, day of month, and essentially says that they arrive on the 1st, the 30th, 31st, 29th, etc. And so what I want to do is I want to just check if these values are in a range. Probably the best way to do this is either say is in and then say the range, or use apply. Kind of up to you, but we're going to say apply lambda is my day in range. And since we want to be inclusive of the 15th, we have to actually go up to 16. And then you can take the sum of this since they're all Boolean values. And this returns back how many values are in for the day column between 1 and inclusive of 15. So that's one way to do it. Keep in mind you could also have started using the is in and created a list using range 1 through 16. And the final hard bonus task question, which the reason it's hard is because it asks you to incorporate a lot of different things, and also it asks you to figure out things that we didn't explicitly mention or show you in the lectures. And so the hard part of it is we have to actually create a new column to be a datetime column, convert it to a datetime object, and then use the .dt time methods to actually grab the name of the day. So the hard bonus task asks us to create a table for the counts for each day of the week that people arrived. For example, 5,000 people arrived on a Monday, 3,000 were on a Tuesday, etc. So you might be thinking, well, where's the date column? And you scroll all the way up here, and you start looking for the actual date that that person arrived. And unfortunately, what's kind of weird here about this particular column is you have it, but it's separated out in a couple of different ways. It's separated out by the day of the month itself, the date week number, so the week number of the arrival date, and then the year of the arrival date. So what we have to do is we have to actually combine the day of month, and year together using an apply method that we can actually vectorize to make it run a little faster. And then we'll convert that to a date time, because if you take a look at this, there's not really a single column that says arrival day. So again, we have to use day of month, and then the year to combine it into a date column. So how do we do this? We're going to come back all the way down here, and we're going to do the following. I'm going to say import NumPy as NP. And keep in mind this one, you pretty much have to do it in more than one line of code. And so I'll create a special function called convert that takes in that day, that month, and that year, and then it's going to return a string. Here I'm using f-string literal formatting. You can use any sort of formatting you want, but it's going to be the day dash the month dash the year. Okay, so now I want to actually grab those 3 columns, arrival date, day of month, arrival date month, and arrival date year, pass them into my convert function. So again, passing in 3 columns. So this is kind of a special version of apply, and that's why I'm going to use np vectorize. So we're going to say that hotels date for date of arrival is equal to np vectorize this convert function, and then inside this tuple we pass in the columns that we actually want to pass in. So I want to pass in the arrival date, day of month. Then I'm going to pass in the arrival date month. And then I'm going to pass in the arrival date year. So Each of these columns then gets passed in to day, month, year, and it returns back this simple string. So we go ahead and run that. And now we see that hotel's date is something that looks like this, 30th of August 2017, 31st of August 2017, which is perfect because that means I can easily pass this into PD to date time and say hotel's date, run that, and now that I take a look at the date, I have it as actual date time objects. And then what that means is if you go, this is a really hard part since we definitely didn't show this in the lectures, you have to go to the time methods documentation online and see that you can call DT, day underscore name, and it returns back the actual day it was of that week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, etc. And then from that, we simply call value counts, and then boom. Now you have the actual number of people that arrived on a Friday, Thursday, etc. So super hard because there's a lot of things you had to figure out here. You had to go to that data reference and figure out that there's 3 separate columns that then you have to combine to create a date, convert that to a datetime object, so then you can call dt.dayname on it, and then grab the value counts. Okay, so I hope you had fun with these exercise questions, definitely pushing your skills as far as we can with Pandas, and luckily we won't have to do something as complicated as this hard bonus task in the future lectures. Okay, thanks, and I'll see you at the next section.